Who are some of the winners and losers coming from the Combine? We are live in Chicago, and we are ready to tell you who won and lost day one of the Combine. What's up? My name is Richard Stayman, aka MavsDraft. I am here with Leif Thulin. We are in our hotel room. We couldn't get too much going for the media like we did last year, but we're hoping that can change tomorrow and just the rest of the week. So you have us from our hotel. This is Leif Thulin. He's one of the smartest college basketball fans. He's the guy who at the Combine, I kept saying, I know who that is. Who is this? And he immediately looks at him and he goes, oh yeah, that's like Nate Clifford. And he is that guy to do that. So thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day here at Locked On NBA Big Board. Means a ton to Leif and I both the Barlows as well. Really means a ton to us. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 on bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. So we were at the NBA Draft Combine. Today, it was just shooting measurements and athletic testing. That's all it was, with a little bit of scrimmaging for the second half of players. Leif, who do you think was the biggest winner of the day?
I'm going with Yves Missi for sure, because not only did he look like the athlete we'd hope he would, there was skill on display, and his shooting, he shot great. Not only was he shooting and making shots, but sometimes you can kind of trick the scales by making a shot, and it's like an ugly make. He was swooshing threes. His mid-range looked good, and he jumped out of the gym. He had a 38.5-inch max, and he also ran like a gazelle on the three-quarter court. So I think while there's players that may have moved themselves up further in discussions that are starting lower, of the people that I think were in the fringe of maybe being a top 20 guy, maybe at the highest being a lottery, I think he's put himself pretty squarely in the conversation to be a lottery pick.
Yeah, we were talking about this, first of all, just big picture. This shouldn't change your draft board. Like Yves Missi, it happens every year. Guys have to shoot threes now. Last year, Trayce Jackson-Davis shot threes. He took a handful in college in his 4 years at Indiana. You have to take it with a grain of salt in some regards. But with someone like Yves Missi, the reason we value that so much, I had Yves Missi number 11 on my board heading into the season. Heading into the Combine. A big part of that was he's raw. He has right now his floor as being a rim runner, but we've seen flashes of him, taking a few dribbles, getting to the rim with a spin move. But also there's free throw percentage is at 62%, and that sounds bad. But for a big who is new to basketball, it's actually not that terrible. So seeing him having to set up, like really set his feet, spot up, and have a lot of flashes should be encouraging and something that teams should work Yves Missi out for. So that's why I think we like him. Do you have anything else to add on?
Yeah,
on Yves?
I think the biggest knock on him throughout the season would be like, well, he doesn't really know how to play basketball, and Baylor's rim protection wasn't great. I think that his raw rim protection and ability defensively showed through, but it didn't necessarily impact the box score or even the analytics of who's shooting well in the Big 12. But what I do think mattered is Yves Missi, we thought, could be a rim runner, a pick and roll threat who catches lobs. And I'm not saying you want him being a pick and pop guy, but throughout the season, Scott Drew gave him the license and the leeway to put the ball on the floor, pivot, put the ball between his legs, do clever things. And you just saw the fluidity with which he moves, which we always knew was possible, but also the coordination showing its effects on shooting, and also his agility in some of those drills that were geared towards showing the prowess of wing defenders. I was pretty impressed with Yves Missi, and I would say he, and along with Bona, were the two guys that I thought impressed, but both with drills. And Bona actually did a good job in some of the scrimmage-esque things they did today. The scrimmages are tomorrow and the next day after that, but they ran 4-on-4 and 5-on-5 shell drills, and Bona was a monster.
Yeah, speaking of Bona, I think he was the second guy on both of our lists that we were like, okay, this dude is incredible right now. He tested extremely well. What was it? The best vertical, I think. He was up there. He was in the top. He was the best for the big.
Yeah, he had a 40-inch max vert, and the highest was 42 which was mostly smaller players whose max vert was more built on acceleration into the jump. Bona just jumped out of the gym, whether it was straight up or off two-step vert.
Yeah, and we saw that a lot in the scrimmages. I'll let Leif talk about the scrimmages. But another thing with the shooting, this is, again, why these combine drills teams take note of. Adem Bona, we don't have the numbers readily available for us right now. They keep coming and going. But what we do know is Adem Bona shot 69.6% from free throw line. That's for the season. Today we don't have those shooting numbers, is what I meant. We don't have the combine numbers.
He went 16 of 25 from mid-range jump shots, and that's one dribble mid-range jumper. So that's pretty valuable for Bona, who shot just about that percentage from free throws. A little bit better than that, but he's doing that on high stakes, one dribble, and he made threes as well with pretty good regularity. And he never took them at UCLA. Yeah,
that's where the value is. Like, there's clear shooting touch. His form isn't terrible, and he had to shoot today. And he looked the part of somebody who, like, okay, yeah, he's not ready to shoot today, not next year, probably not the year after that. But I mean, there are guys like Brook Lopez. He didn't shoot until his like his 7th+ year in the league. Like, so it's something down the road you look at and say, hey, maybe there's something here. Another guy, I think, actually, we'll talk a little bit about Zach Edey later and more of the bigs. But moving away from the bigs, who do you think was some of the big standouts today?
Yeah, I think there's a couple players and that really made a name. The one last thing about Missi that I would say that you guys who are like, oh, well, you didn't talk about him as a top 20 guy too often before that. I think he was the type of guy that needed to measure well in terms of agility because you knew he could jump. But then when he shot well, it really mattered. In terms of Bona, it was like you guys had him 40th largely. I think maybe we're a little higher than him. But the reason that matters is because he's the type of guy who could sneak into the late first because of his dominance in the defensive end in the 4-on-4 and 5-on-5 shell drills where they were running pick and rolls. And Bona was the best offensive and defensive big in the pick and rolls, and he bossed everything. Yep. So to answer your question about the guards, or wings, I thought Dalton Connect was a big winner from today, along with Reed Sheppard. Reed Sheppard had a 42-inch vertical, and that's going to take all the headlines. We saw that was right in front of us. We were right by the max vert station, so we saw different approaches. Sheppard did it off of one foot, jumping off his left foot, and I was like, wow, that was pretty high. And I wonder if 42 is a little bit generous, but he really soared nonetheless. And then he, of course, shot well. He and Connect were shooting on opposite baskets, and I would literally go one shot, two shot, and I'd look back and forth, and they was just make after make after make. And the other reason I thought Connect did a really great job is he shot 20 of 25 from three in some of these drills where you have to run back and forth. And not only did he do that, he made his mid-range jump shots, but he had a 39-inch vertical. And what else did Connect do? Oh, he was number one in a three-cone sort of drill, the shuttle, which was under 3 seconds. He completed it. And then he was number two in terms of the lateral movement drill where you run, you slide, you backpedal, you slide back the other way, sprint, slide, and backpedal. And he did all of that in 10 and a half seconds, which was second among all people. And the only person who beat him was KJ Simpson.
Yeah, I mean, that, like, all these tests, they generally paint a bigger picture, right? It's to quantify a lot of the things that we didn't have throughout the year. And also a lot of college basketball reference and teams, how they list their players is inaccurate. And this is a way to correct it. Kind of just going back to the Reed Sheppard stuff, that is 100% inflated. He does not have a 40-inch vertical. What you need to do with this information is really kind of put it together and go, okay, he averaged almost a block a game, over 2 steals a game. The reason that he can get into a lot of those blocks, some of them are listed as like swipes that count as, like technically it's a shot, but also he gets good contest. And because of that, like, we know that he can get off the ground, whether it's 42, 40, 29, or not really 29, but like 35, whatever it is, like, it doesn't actually matter. It's just about that bigger picture. And that's really all of the athletic testing. So I think that's just that kind of key takeaway. We're going to talk about some losers of today's combine and the measurements and everything. But first, let's talk about FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL playoffs, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV and sick of having to turn down the volume from all the yelling and the drama? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis on opinions and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I'm here, Richard Stayman, aka MavsDraft, with Leif Thulin, let's talk about some of the players that we thought didn't meet our expectations today. Not quite the losers, but the guys who we think maybe their stock fell. Who stands out? And if you were given that prompt, who stands out to you on that?
The first person that comes to my mind that I felt like underwhelmed has largely to do with the expectations that surround him rather than the actual performance. That would be Alex Sarr, who is he's assumed to be the #1 pick. He probably still will be, but athletically, he didn't look the part to me. Like, he's billed to be this defensive ace who's compared to Jaren Jackson Jr., to Jonathan Isaac, some guys that are just unbelievable movers for their size. And he was thoroughly beaten in agility drills by Zach Edey, who's 7'4", 300 pounds without shoes on. Like, he's a massive man, and Edey looked faster. That was right in front of us once more. Edey looked faster, and he sounded faster. Like, Edey was huffing and puffing, but he was moving, and Sarr was kind of sliding through, but didn't look the agile and everything you assumed about the guy. And you watch him, and he looks pretty fluid, but he's fluid in a way that's not explosive. It's fluid because he's coordinated, and he shot well. So I wouldn't say he's a loser, but the first thing that came to my mind is, if that's my guy #1, his main calling card is this defensive athleticism and fluidity, I think you have to be a better, more explosive athlete to have that label of who he is and what he's supposed to be. So that's my first disappointment.
Yeah, I get that. It didn't faze me much. He looked a little bit stiff on some of them. It's not a big worry for me, but I thought you were actually going to go with a different top 5 prospect, and that's Matas Buzelis. I've had my doubts. The percentages are really low. He's billed as this tall shooter who can't shoot. And also, he's just not this, he doesn't embrace physicality. It's the nicest way I'll put it. My issue is that release. I'm a sucker for the clean releases, but his shot is completely different off the dribble versus on the catch. He shoots to the side of his head, but it's not accurate. It's almost, it feels extremely forced. It's like he's aiming. He's not shooting. It's not very natural. That to me is a big turnoff as a shooter. I struggle with him, man. I know he was really athletic. He looked that part, but you got to be able to shoot. Like, for him, if he's not even touching league average shooting, which at this point, no indication says he's going to do that as a rookie, I have a hard time seeing how he sticks in the league. And I'm not trying to make a sweeping generalization. It's just seeing that up close really makes you kind of question how that is. Like, again, 70% from the line in the G League, not terrible, but 26% from 3 on good volume. I have a lot of questions around him. And today, just watching that shot, to me, did him no favors.
I'm with you. So for those of you wondering, okay, you guys have seen him play before. You've evaluated his strengths and weaknesses. What does in-person do to change it? Here's what I would say. I know his release is kind of from the side and a little bit slower, but none of these guys are shooting like speed shots and people are really closing out of them. So the way I described it to Richard and in there is, I feel like all really good shooters catch and shoot the ball without having to spin the ball into their laces. Like, when a quarterback catches a snap and they spin it to their laces, well, in basketball, you read the laces so you have the ball by the seams and it spins. It's pure. If anyone's shooting a free throw, of course, you're going to line it up that way. It felt like Buzelis and a few others had to get the ball to laces to even have a prayer of it going in.
Yep.
And then he shot a knuckleball. And what I mean by a knuckleball, for those of you who aren't terribly into baseball, is the ball doesn't spin much. Most good shooters get 3 or 4 rotations from the time that the ball, full rotations of all the way around from the time the ball releases from the hand to the rim from 3. And Buzelis is about at 1.5, maybe 1.25. And Cody Williams is much of the same. Their ball doesn't rotate very much, even if the jump shot for Williams at least looks smooth. It releases and it doesn't spin very much. Buzelis is a little bit janky, releases slowly. And so I was disappointed in that. But he did have a 38-inch vertical, and he moved pretty well in the agility drill. So there was saving grace for him, but it certainly didn't say, well, that guy is too low on a board. But some of these wings have to be picked. Like Cody Williams didn't play well. Ron Holland didn't shoot well, even if his shot looked better than maybe Buzelis's or Cody Williams. And then Stephon Castle shot it well, but if you watch the video, it's a little bit janky in terms of he dips it below his belt, and then he kind of has this wristy action. So I wasn't impressed by that kind of quartet of wings or big guards in terms of their shooting either.
Yeah, so also just for reference, I've talked to a lot of NBA scouts that they're like, okay, percentages, like that's the best indicator for translating jump shooting. Like, right, the free throw percentage first, 3-point percentage, the volume, all that. Then watching them, but like the big thing with that I've heard from a lot of scouts is they say, well, how much spin does he get on his ball? Like we said, you don't want the knuckleball shooter who shot 40% from 3 on 2 shots from 2 threes a game.
That's Cody Williams, for those you wondering.
So that was actually hypothetical in my head. That wasn't even a knock on him. But the point is, you'd rather have that than a guy who like is a sharpshooter who has not shot super well, like 34% on good volume, but gets those like 4+ spins on every rotations, on his ball, and it's always consistent. And usually the way you can tell if the ball has good spin, and it's supposed to go straight down the same way of follow through, right? Like that, it goes this way only, and it rolls like it somersaults, right? A lot of these balls, they were going sideways, and I'm going off camera here, but like this, and that's off. That's what you don't want. But my Matas notes, and then we'll talk about some other guys more like Zach Edey in more detail, but my Matas notes, I very quickly wrote this down while he was shooting, and I said Matas just airballed the shot from a standstill drill. His shot looks better off the dribble than on the catch. Overall, it still feels like the percentages are exactly indicative of where he is as a shooter. So, any last thoughts on Matas Buzelis before we move on to Zach Edey and some other guys?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I think the fact he's looked really built, like his body looks more physically in form. Like he's grown into his body. He used to be pretty lanky. He looked almost like lean, muscular type this year. Helped him, but I don't think the shot's at all good, and I don't think it ever really will be.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Well, let's talk more, just some other guys like Zach Edey. We can dive a little bit more into that Alex Sarr stuff too. But first, let's talk about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take on a game to a new level and during basketball's postseason. I have some friends that use this a lot. I'm personally not a bettor. Leif works in the NBA, so he can't. But Prize Picks is just phenomenal. It's really interesting. You're not competing against any of these hyper bettors or anything. It's just you versus the prop. Download the app, the Prize Picks app today, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's LOCKEDONNBA as the code for a first deposit match up to $100. So again, my name is Richard Stayman, aka MavsDraft. You might know my work from some of the scouting reports and everything I do. Leif Thulin is one of the smartest college basketball minds out there in the entire country. Let's talk about some of these other guys that we thought didn't do too well. I'm just looking at my notes here. Let's talk about some positives I think that we didn't see coming. I think the biggest one we have to talk about, Carlton Carrington. That dude shot the ball. Like, I was really surprised. It's a little bit slow, partially because he jumps so high that he almost keeps the ball in accordance, which is good. But it also makes him a little blockable. But you can't deny that shooting ability. Like, we knew the touch was good. Today was just on another level.
Yeah, he was the best shooter. I wouldn't say he's the best pure shooter, but today he shot the best of anyone, whether it was one dribble, whether it was catch and shoot, star drill. Carlton Carrington showed that he can do that. He's often criticized for, he's got the ball in his hands a ton and he's a streaky shooter. Well, he can really shoot, and he's a plus-size guard who's young. I think that you kind of don't think he's got the speed, but if he shoots that well and he's got the ability to take the shots that he's and take and make the shots that he took at Pittsburgh as a freshman, that bodes well. I think he moved himself up. I wouldn't be surprised if he's taken in the top 20 now. Probably, I'd say 18 to 25 is probably his range. I personally had him around 27 entering this. I'd probably move him up a little bit. I thought he moved himself up the most. And there was a couple players that I thought shot well and didn't athletically test well, and I didn't think his athletic testings were negatives either. And I think that's a big positive for someone who doesn't appear like a great athlete, whereas Keisan George shot the ball really well. You kind of expected that, but athletically, he was among the very worst testers.
Yeah, I was actually going to get to Keisan George. I think you summarized Carrington really well, and I echo all of that. I think his stock had been under the radar for this entire time, but I think Keisan George, he was never going to test athletically well. Like for me, my biggest concern all year had been how does his defense translate? Like he has some instincts, but like also he has limitations and he limits himself generally. And it was obvious. Like his max vertical was 32, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was 32. We're going to roll with that because I'm 95% sure of that. And like he just didn't blow away. He had the worst.
His 3/4 court sprint was terrible, and his movement was really unfortunate because he went after someone who was cat quick in terms of the agility drills, so it just looked even worse. But he kind of lumbers, and a few of those perimeter defenders just like scamper, and they're really quick at doing it. And so I think that was almost embellished, but you can see the deficiencies there. His shot's got a beautiful high arc, and it's a soft release out of his hands, good rotation. So I think his size and his shooting gives him a spot in the league, but the upside is tempered because it's really hard to be the lack of athlete and project to be off of the ball. He'd have to play on the ball, in my opinion, more than I project in order for him to be a success. Yeah, I mean, he's a 6'7" shooter. He's also going to be 21 by his 30th game in the NBA. It's a little bit tough as a freshman rookie. I do think there's a spot for tall shooters like him. It's just, again, how real is his shot? He killed it today. I mean, or I guess by the time you listen to this, really yesterday, but irrelevant. The shot is just so high arcing. And I'm sitting next to somebody who, by the way, has the highest arcing shot I know. So I'm just always skeptical. I think it looks beautiful personally. It's a moon ball though. But here's the issue that I would contend. He's not forcing it upward. Fair. It comes out of his hands quickly, whereas some of the people who've shot high in years past end up pushing the ball with their palm. He shoots it with his fingers still. So I like the way he shoots the ball. I think it is very high. I would argue maybe like Deron Holmes, who shot very well, and we can talk about him too. He pushes the ball more than George. I think George is a more natural stroke, so I actually buy the shot. Well, Deron Holmes had a new jump shot. His looked significantly different from when I saw him even in November at SMU. And it looked better than in March when I saw him at Madness play twice. And it used to have a little hitch on it where he would kind of start the ball low to the left and move it up to the right. It was all on the right side. He's a right-handed shooter, and it had good arc, good rotation. He went 18 of 25 from three. So let's hit some rapid fires here. The first group was the bigs plus Ryan Dunn. You had some thoughts. You had a lot to say about Ryan Dunn when that was happening live. You want to share some of that? Yeah, so Dunn, I thought, was very streaky and seemed to get down on himself. There's a lack of confidence shooting. He moved very fluidly, had a 38.5-inch vertical. He did all the things you'd expect from a defender. He did those well. The concerns would be his shot. And I would argue his shot had solid touch in terms of the consistency of where he missed. It was often short, and the arc was good, and the misses were soft. But I don't think he knows when to release the ball. It felt like his arm was his catches, his right elbow as a right-handed shooter when he caught the ball was cocked outward a little bit, and when he bring the ball up, it influenced the way he released it, and there were variations of the timing of the release, and so he often missed the ball short. When he'd get enough distance on the ball, he made it, but that's not a good shooter. He didn't shoot well from the free throw line either, and I mean, you saw why he's a 20% three-point shooter, and you also saw the athleticism which enables him to be a amazing defender, but he only tested in as a little bit while wearing shoes about 6'7". Yeah, and that's not a center. You have to then have faith he can shoot a little bit to be a small forward or a power forward. Yeah, let's talk about somebody who is a very real center. Leif said it earlier. We were in front of basically 3 or 4 stations. The max vert was directly in front of us. We were exactly in the middle of that in the shuttle. Or what was it called? Drawing an absolute blank, but it's an agility drill. The agility run, the one where he was describing earlier, where you slide back, it's lateral. It's a lateral quickness drill, right? Drawing a crazy blank on the proper name, and then to the left was the
shuttle run where it's just back and forth out, and then the standing vert as well. In those, Zach Edey, I mean, it sounded like a freight train was coming. Like there's stories about how Mike Trout in baseball, how when he's running around, when he's rounding the bases, you hear him huffing and puffing and like you want to get out of the way. That's how it felt with Edey. Like the ground like was shaking. Like it literally felt like you could hear the ground shaking when he was running. And that was spectacular. Like that just general strength while running. And also he's like pretty fluid, all things considered. Like he's always been fluid. Big picture, he's still an issue in isolation, but like he's not stiff by any means. Like he out like you said, he had better numbers than Alex Sarr.
Yeah, he had better numbers, looked better, even sounded better, and he blew Donovan Clingan out of the water. Like Clingan's supposed to be a top 3 or 4 pick, and Clingan jumped lower by a considerable amount. Clingan was under 30 inches as of max vertical. And then Edey jumped better, ran far better, ran better as a 3/4 sprint, even at that weight. Agility was far better, and he shot very, very well. I think Zach Edey made himself quite a bit of money in terms of how much he moved up. And you know, we talked to a scout, and he was saying that he thinks there's a chance that some of those mocks that we consider like, oh, is that silly that Edey's up high, maybe even touching the lottery? We asked him, hey, is that real? And he goes, I could see it if he continues to showcase what he did today in workouts. So maybe that stock is really real. Richard and I are entered a little bit skeptical, myself probably more so, but I emerged very impressed by Zach Edey. I think he was quite literally a big winner.
Yeah, I think I wanted to end on a positive, but first let's just do quick rapid fire on this guy. Donovan Clingan, he tested probably the worst physically of any single player today. Poor athleticism in general, but to us, we were like, well, he's a functional athlete. Like he's a gamer kind of athlete, not a, hey, I'm going to go around and run some like just full court windmill. That's not him. To me, that didn't really matter. It kind of was disappointing. What did you think?
Yeah, I think it's all context related. Donovan Clingan is a drop coverage big. And so who cares if he slides his feet sensationally? It's more about can he recover and can he time blocks? What Donovan Clingan does excellently is execute the principle of verticality on defense. Like Roy Hibbert was the master of this, where he would put his arm straight up and defend, and you'd have to go over the tower that was Roy Hibbert, or in this case, Donovan Clingan. Who cares if he jumps 29.5 inches versus 32 and his arms are touching the sky? Like there's very few differences of shots that get over him with that lack of verticality that we nitpick. I think that he's also a good passer. That's not measured in any of these drills. I thought Clingan actually shot the ball pretty well. It looked pretty clean off his hands.
Yeah.
I don't think that matters very much, but if you're going to go off of drills, I think there needs to be context with it. And so this doesn't necessarily change my evaluation of Clingan, but it actually helped me think, wow, Zach Edey's, like you look at him compared to a guy that was supposed to be the better athlete, and Edey won that battle like handily, both in the national championship game in terms of his scoring. Obviously, Clingan team dominated. And then athletically, I was pretty darn impressed with the way that Zach Edey performed, more than I was frustrated or disappointed in Donovan Clingan.
Yeah, and the only takeaway I have from the shooting, he's not a stretch big. Please don't do this. The only thing I got from it was he shot 57% from the free throw line. Maybe he gets up into the 60s. That was my entire takeaway with that. Let's end on a positive. We're going to go to teammate Alex Sarr. He measured in at 6'6.5" with a near 7-foot wingspan. I think it was like 6'11 and a half. That was really impressive. And also, he was arguably the best shooter. He had the best shooting numbers the entire day. What did you think of Sarr? Stock up, stock down, no impact? What do you think?
I would say his wingspan helped him, but I don't think he laterally is very good. I don't think he's a very good defender, honestly. I think he was helped by Donovan Clingan's presence, but he's a knockdown shooter. So it didn't really change my evaluation. I've watched probably the last 2 years of UConn. I've probably watched 60 games, and that's not even much of an exaggeration. I watched pretty much every game UConn played the last 2 years, and Alex Sarr's opened up UConn's offense. If you think about how UConn plays basketball, Alex Sarr's the key, because you need someone who can stretch the floor to complement a big that was a Dama Sanogo, along with this year Donovan Clingan. And he's the reason that they can execute those weave actions, because you have to guard the 4 and the 2 comes flying off in Cam Spencer. And Stephon Castle can attack the rack because the 4 can't be there to help defend the rim. Karaban to me is a really, really smart basketball player who maximizes his ability. And while we're on the topic, we were at a Big East stadium, DePaul. I thought all the Big East kids played really well in the shell drills. Like Cam Spencer knocked down open threes, defended well. Baylor Shireman hit tough shots. He created shots out of thin air, defensively rotated very well. Karaban was heady. Those guys are battle tested, and it showed, whereas some of these guys are more raw and maybe more athletic. But those guys were better in the sense of this is basketball. And I expect tomorrow, this is a prediction and maybe a good way to lead us out, is I expect those type of guys who've played more basketball games, the Baylor Shiremans, the Cam Spencers, to shine in the scrimmages, especially if they shoot well. But even if they don't, their intangibles shine through even in shell drills. I expect them to thrive in the scrimmages.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Well, this wraps up another episode of Locked On NBA Big Board. We're going to be back tomorrow covering some of the scrimmages, hopefully from Wintrust Arena in Chicago rather than the hotel. We're hoping to find a better situation. But thank you so much for making Locked On NBA Big Board your first listen of the day. Go ahead and check out Locked On Sports Today, free on YouTube and the Fire Stick, and we will be back tomorrow.